Right now, at the end of 2025, something unthinkable is happening across Europe. Volkswagen, the crown jewel of German industrial might, is closing factories on German soil for the first time in its 88-year history. Let that sink in. Volkswagen closing German factories. But here's where it gets interesting. Just 800 kilometers to the east in Hungary, they can't build factories fast enough. While Germany enters recession, while France struggles with unemployment, while the entire European Union fights a losing trade war with China, Hungary is smashing investment records. Real wages are climbing by 10%. Unemployment has virtually disappeared. And Chinese electric vehicle giants are pouring billions of euros into a country that we've been told is isolated, backwards, and on the wrong side of history. For years, the international media has painted Viktor Orban as a pariah, an authoritarian, a threat to European values. Brussels has frozen billions in funding. The European Parliament has condemned him repeatedly. And yet, when you look at the raw economic numbers, you're forced to ask an uncomfortable, almost heretical question. What if he's right? What if, while Brussels was busy lecturing Hungary about democracy and values, Orban was quietly building the only economy in Europe that actually works for the 21st century? Today we're going to look at the other side of the Orban economy. Not the morality, not the politics, just the cold, hard economic strategy. And I warn you, some of what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about how modern economies are supposed to work. Let's dive in. To understand why Viktor Orban sleeps soundly at night while Angela Merkel's successors panic about deindustrialization, you need to understand a concept he calls economic neutrality. In Hungarian, it's called gazdasági semlegység. In late 2024, while the United States and the European Union were obsessed with de-risking and decoupling from China, essentially trying to break up with the world's factory, Orban went on national radio and said something that made Brussels absolutely furious. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "You're all crazy." His argument was simple but devastating. The world is splitting into two massive economic blocs, the West and the East. America and its allies on one side, China and its partners on the other. And according to Orban, if you pick a side, if you become a loyal soldier in either bloc, you're signing your own death warrant. What? Because if you're just another member of the Western Bloc, you're at the periphery. You're far from where the decisions are made. You're far from the capital. And most importantly, you only get to trade with half the world. In a globalized economy, that's economic suicide. Orban's solution? Refuse to choose. Make Hungary the keystone state. The only place in Europe where American capital, German engineering, and Chinese technology can all legally sit at the same table and make money together. Think about this strategically. Germany is trying to ban Chinese electric vehicles to protect its struggling automotive industry. But here's the problem. The Chinese EVs are coming anyway. They're better. They're cheaper. And they have the battery technology that Europe desperately needs. Germany is trying to build a dam to stop the flood. Orban is building a harbor to channel it. In his 2025 action plan, the Hungarian government explicitly stated they want to achieve GDP growth between 3% and 6%. To put that in perspective, that's a number that sounds like pure fantasy to Germany, which actually shrank by 0.1% in 2023 and barely moved in 2024. France and Italy aren't doing much better. The entire Eurozone is trapped in stagnation. But Hungary? Hungary is telling Chinese investors, "Come here. We won't sanction you. We won't lecture you about human rights or democracy. We won't force you to comply with 1,000 regulations about diversity and carbon emissions. We'll just let you build." And here's the part that makes Western economists uncomfortable. It's working. While Volkswagen discusses plant closures in Germany for the first time in its history, German automotive giants like BMW are actually doubling down on Hungary. They're expanding their operations there. Why? Because they know that if they want to survive in the age of electric vehicles, they need Chinese battery technology. And the only safe place in Europe where a German company can partner with Chinese firms without getting destroyed by sanctions or political backlash is Budapest. Orban has turned Hungary into the Switzerland of the new Cold War. And just like Switzerland got rich by being neutral in the last one, Hungary might be positioning itself to do the same in this one. But is this genius or is it playing with fire? Can you really be neutral when the world is splitting into hostile camps? That's the trillion-dollar question. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now let's stop talking about abstract philosophy and look at concrete reality. And when I say concrete, I mean literal concrete and steel rising from the Hungarian plains. If you drive down the M5 motorway toward the southern city of Szeged, you'll see the future being built in real time. BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle giant that recently overtook Tesla in global sales, chose Hungary for its first-ever European passenger car factory. This isn't a small commitment. This is a multi-billion-euro investment creating thousands of jobs. And crucially, it allows BYD to stamp "Made in EU" on their cars, completely bypassing any tariffs that Brussels tries to impose on Chinese vehicles. But BYD is just the appetizer. Travel east to Debrecen and you'll find something even bigger. CATL, the world's largest battery manufacturer, is building a $7.3 billion gigafactory. That's not a typo. $7.3 billion. This is one of the largest foreign direct investments in the history of Hungary. One investment. Now here's where Orban's strategy moves from simple to sophisticated, from checkers to 4D chess. Right next door to that Chinese battery plant, BMW is building its own massive factory to produce its new E-Class electric vehicles. The newest generation of BMW electric cars will be built in Hungary. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think BMW just randomly decided to build right next to a Chinese battery factory? Absolutely not. BMW needs CATL batteries. They're the best in the world. But they can't easily import them from China anymore because of logistics costs, supply chain risks, and increasing political pressure from both Washington and Brussels. So Orban brought the mountain to Muhammad. He created a unique industrial ecosystem where a German luxury car is assembled with a Chinese heart on Hungarian soil. This is brilliant for multiple reasons. First, it makes Hungary indispensable. If Brussels decides to punish Hungary by cutting off EU funding, they're not just hurting Orban. They're hurting BMW. They're hurting Mercedes, which also has major operations in Hungary. They're hurting the entire German industrial machine that now depends on Hungarian supply chains. Orban has effectively turned his country into a human shield made of German car parts. Berlin can complain about Hungarian democracy all it wants, but it can't afford to actually destroy the Hungarian economy because it would destroy German industry in the process. Second, it gives Hungary a guaranteed place in the supply chain of the future. While countries like Italy and France are fighting over scraps of investment, Hungary has already positioned itself as the critical link between East and West. For the next 20 years, if you want to build electric vehicles in Europe, you're probably going to need something from Hungary. Now, let me be clear about the risks. This is a high-stakes gamble. If the United States and China go to an actual shooting war, this entire house of cards collapses. Hungary would be caught in the middle, with both Chinese and German investments suddenly becoming geopolitical liabilities rather than assets. But Orban is betting that money talks louder than missiles. He's betting that Germany needs its industry more than it needs to lecture Hungary. He's betting that China needs a foothold in Europe more than it needs to dominate Hungary politically. And when you look at that $5 billion BYD factory rising in Szeged, when you see thousands of workers clocking in every day at the CATL gigafactory in Debrecen, it's a very loud bet indeed. While the rest of Europe debates how to solve its demographic crisis with migration, Viktor Orban is trying to solve it with something else. Cold, hard cash. This isn't a campaign promise. This isn't a future plan. This is law right now. As of October 2025, if you're a Hungarian mother with 3 children, what's your personal income tax rate? Take a guess. 0. Not reduced. Not low. 0. For the rest of your life. This is the most aggressive pro-natalist policy in the Western world. While German and French families are getting crushed by inflation and taxes, the Hungarian government has effectively turned the country into a tax haven for mothers. But it goes far beyond just tax breaks. Hungary has introduced the CSOK system, subsidized loans for families that get completely written off if you have children. 3 kids? Your loan disappears. They offer subsidies for 7-seater vehicles because, obviously, you need a bigger car for a bigger family. The Hungarian government is spending nearly 4 to 5% of GDP on family support programs. To put that in perspective, that's more than most NATO countries spend on their entire military budget. The critics call it social engineering. They call it traditionalist propaganda. They say Orban is trying to turn women into baby-making machines. And those criticisms exist and we should acknowledge them. But let's look at the cold economic logic for a moment, divorced from the moral questions. Europe is dying. Literally. The workforce is shrinking across the continent. Germany needs 400,000 migrants every single year just to keep its factories running, just to maintain the tax base needed to pay for pensions. The average age in Europe is climbing. Retirement systems are collapsing under the weight of demographics. Orban looked at that math and said, no, we're not going to import our workforce. We're going to build our own. It's an incredibly expensive gamble. Costs billions of euros every year. Money that could be spent on infrastructure, on education, on healthcare. But here's the thing. If it works, if Hungary can stabilize its population without relying on mass migration, it will be the only country in Europe with a cohesive, culturally stable society in 2050. You can argue about whether that's good or bad. You can debate the ethics of using financial incentives to influence reproductive decisions. But you cannot argue with the immediate economic impact. Right now, for those 250,000 Hungarian mothers paying zero income tax, the Orban economy doesn't feel like a crisis. Feels like winning the lottery. Is this sustainable long-term? That's an open question. But in the short term, it's creating political support that's unshakable. When a mother looks at her tax bill and sees zero, when a father gets a subsidized loan for a house that disappears when his third child is born, it's very hard to convince them that Orban is ruining the country. If you want to know why Viktor Orban keeps winning elections despite international condemnation, despite headlines calling him a dictator, despite the European Union freezing billions in funds, you just need to look at one chart. One simple number that tells you everything about political reality. In 2010, before Orban took power, the unemployment rate in Hungary was over 11%. Today, in late 2025, it's hovering around 4.5%. That's not just low unemployment. That's what economists call full employment. In fact, the economy is running so hot that factories are actually running out of workers. Companies are competing with each other for employees, driving wages up. Now compare that to the rest of Europe. Spain, 10.8% unemployment. France, 7%. Even Sweden, the model Nordic social democracy, is sitting at 8.9%. While young people in southern Europe are struggling to find any job at all, in Hungary there are help-wanted signs in every window. And here's the statistic that really disrupts the mainstream narrative about Hungary. Real wages are growing. Yes, 2023 was brutal. Inflation hit Hungary hard, probably the hardest in Europe at one point, and it ate everyone's purchasing power. But in 2024 and 2025, real wages, adjusted for inflation, bounced back dramatically, growing by roughly 9 to 10%. People aren't just working. They're getting richer. Actually, immeasurably richer. So when the Western media publishes another article about how the Hungarian economy is collapsing, about how Orban's policies are destroying the country, the average Hungarian voter looks at their paycheck, looks at the now hiring signs everywhere, looks at their neighbor who just got a raise and thinks, what collapse? This is the secret to Orban's political longevity. It's not propaganda. It's not control of the media, though that helps. It's not even about values or culture. It's about jobs. It's about paychecks. It's about the simple fact that if you're a 35-year-old Hungarian worker, your life has gotten measurably better since Orban took power. Does that excuse everything else? Does that make Hungary a perfect democracy? Of course not. But it explains why the opposition can't win. It's very hard to convince someone their country is failing when they just got a 10% raise. But here's the trap that Orban is acutely aware of. We've talked about Chinese factories and German car plants. The danger is obvious. Hungary could become nothing more than an assembly line colony. A place where foreign giants make money while locals just screw in the bolts for minimum wage. Where all the profits flow to Shanghai and Munich, and Hungary is left with nothing but low-wage jobs and environmental damage. Orban knows this. That's why in late 2024, his government launched the Debrecen Sandor program. This is a massive capital injection, billions of forints designed specifically for SMEs, small and medium enterprises. The goal is ambitious. Double the size of Hungarian small businesses within a few years. They're handing out cheap loans to local entrepreneurs. They're providing grants for digitalization so Hungarian companies can compete with modern supply chain requirements. They're injecting capital to help local Hungarian businesses become suppliers for those big Chinese and German factories instead of just watching from the sidelines. The strategy is what you might call national capitalism. They don't want Hungary to just be a place where Mercedes builds cars. They want Hungarian companies to make the seats, the glass, the electronics, and the software for that Mercedes. They want Hungarian engineers designing components, Hungarian managers running divisions, Hungarian entrepreneurs building businesses that plug into the global supply chain. It's protectionism, pure and simple. But here's the thing. In a world where free trade is dying, where every major economy is turning inward, where America first and China first are the new normal, maybe protectionism isn't a dirty word anymore. Maybe it's just survival. While thousands of small businesses went bankrupt across Western Europe in 2024 due to energy costs, Hungary is using state intervention to keep its little guys alive. Is it economically efficient? Free market economists would scream, no. They point out all the ways that government interference distorts markets and creates inefficiencies. But is it keeping the economy stable? Is it preventing social unrest? The 3% GDP growth projection for 2025 suggests that maybe the answer is yes. In our discussions about Hungary's economy, there's one elephant in the room we need to address head-on. Hungary is the only country in the European Union still heavily dependent on Russian gas. While the rest of Europe has been scrambling to cut ties with Moscow since the Ukraine war began, Hungary has kept the gas flowing from Russia. From a moral standpoint, from a geopolitical security standpoint, this is controversial at best and deeply problematic at worst. But today we're looking at the cold economic calculation. So let's look at the receipts. While German factories are shutting down because electricity costs have tripled or quadrupled, Hungarian manufacturing is booming. Why? Because Viktor Orban refused to cut the cord. He looked at the sanctions regime and said, "I will not make my people freeze for a war that isn't ours." The Rezsicsakans, the utility cost reduction program, is the holy grail of Hungarian domestic politics. The government strictly regulates the price of gas and electricity for households. The result? Hungarians pay some of the lowest utility bills in the entire European Union. While a middle-class family in Berlin or London is choosing between heating and eating during winter, a family in Budapest keeps the thermostat comfortable without financial stress. But this isn't just about keeping households warm. This is about industrial competitiveness. Those Chinese battery factories we talked about earlier? They consume massive amounts of electricity. Battery manufacturing is one of the most energy-intensive industries in the world. If Hungary had German-level energy prices, BYD and CATL would never have invested there. They would have gone to China, to Southeast Asia, anywhere with cheap, reliable power. By securing cheap energy, yes, Russian energy, Orban created a competitive moat that Western Europe simply cannot cross. German factories can't compete with Hungarian factories when they're paying 3 times as much for power. It's basic math. Is it morally complicated? Absolutely. Does it make Hungary dependent on Russia? Yes. But from a purely economic perspective, it's the reason the lights are still on and the factories are still running. This is what Orban means by economic neutrality. While Europe is willing to sacrifice its industry for geopolitical principles, Hungary is willing to trade with anyone who offers a good deal. It's amoral capitalism. And in a world where everyone else is playing by the same rules, that might be the only way to survive. If you really want to understand the Orban economic gamble, you have to go back to 2008. Hungary was bankrupt. The global financial crisis hit, and the country had to be bailed out by the IMF and the European Union. But bailouts come with strings attached. The IMF and EU imposed strict austerity measures. They dictated budget cuts, tax increases, spending limits. They told Hungary exactly how to run its economy. Orban has never forgiven them. Since returning to power in 2010, his entire economic philosophy can be summed up in one phrase: never let them hold the checkbook again. When the European Union froze billions in funding to Hungary over rule of law concerns, critics said it would crush the Hungarian economy. The ATM was closed. Brussels had cut off the money. Surely Hungary would have to bend the knee and accept whatever terms Brussels demanded. But look what happened. Did Hungary collapse? No. Orban just changed bankers. He issued government bonds to different buyers. He took loans from China. He borrowed from Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. He diversified the national debt so that no single entity, not Brussels, not Washington, not the IMF, could pull the rug out from under him. Is Chinese debt dangerous? Maybe. There are legitimate concerns about what happens if Hungary can't pay back those loans. But Orban would argue, is Chinese debt more dangerous than having your entire economy held hostage by political votes in the European Parliament? At least the Chinese just want their interest payments. They don't ask Hungary to change its constitution. They don't threaten to cut off funding if Hungary passes laws Beijing doesn't like. This strategy had a painful cost. The inflation we talked about earlier? That was partly the price of this transition. Moving from EU dependency to a diversified debt structure caused economic turbulence. But now that inflation is falling back down to 3 to 4% in 2025, Hungary is emerging with a debt structure that's arguably more resilient because it's not dependent on a single master. We've talked about China. We've talked about Russia. But there's one final massive pillar of the Orban economy we can't ignore: the United States. For years, Viktor Orban was the only European leader openly supporting Donald Trump. While leaders in Berlin, Paris, and London were rolling their eyes or openly mocking Trump, Orban was wearing the MAGA hat, metaphorically and sometimes literally. He bet his entire diplomatic reputation on one outcome, a Trump victory in 2024. And he won that bet. With the Trump administration back in the White House as of January 2025, Hungary is no longer the black sheep of Europe. It's the bridge. While Germany and France are scrambling to figure out how to deal with new U.S. tariffs and an America First trade policy, Orban is sitting pretty. He has the personal relationship with Trump. He has ideological alignment with the new administration. Remember that peace mission to Moscow and Beijing that everyone in Brussels condemned? In hindsight, it looks less like a rogue maverick move and more like a job application. Orban positioned himself as the only man in Europe who can pick up the phone and talk to Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and Kiev all in the same afternoon. If the war in Ukraine ends through a negotiated settlement brokered by Trump, something Orban has been pushing for since day one, Hungary stands to become the logistical hub for the reconstruction of Eastern Europe. While other countries were choosing sides, Orban was building relationships with everyone. And now he might be the only person everyone will talk to. He didn't just bet on a horse. He bet on owning the entire racetrack. And right now he's holding what looks like a winning ticket. So we return to our original question. What if he's right? It's easy to criticize Hungary. The concerns about corruption are real. The centralization of power is documented. The rhetoric can be harsh, even ugly at times. Democratic backsliding is a legitimate concern. None of that should be dismissed or ignored. But if you look purely at the macroeconomic strategy, you have to admit something uncomfortable. While the rest of Europe is trapped in slow-motion decline, paralyzed by debt, aging populations, deindustrialization, and bureaucratic paralysis, Hungary is actively trying to evolve. Is trying to become a new kind of state. Part Chinese factory. Part German workshop. Part American ally. Part Russian energy hub. It's a Frankenstein economy, stitched together from contradictory parts that shouldn't work together. It's weird. It's risky. It violates every rule in the Brussels playbook. But here's the thing. Unlike the stagnant, predictable decline of Western Europe, it's alive. It's growing. It's adapting. If Orban's gamble succeeds, and that's still a big if, he won't just save the Hungarian economy. He will prove that the liberal democratic model isn't the only way to be rich and modern in 21st century Europe. He will prove that national sovereignty can be more profitable than European unity. He will prove that you can trade with everyone while belonging to no one. And that is what truly terrifies Brussels. Not that he will fail, they expect that. What terrifies them is the possibility that he might succeed. Because if Hungary can thrive while ignoring EU lectures, while maintaining ties with Russia, while welcoming Chinese investment, while cozying up to Trump, then what's the point of the European project? If a small country of 10 million people can outperform Germany by refusing to follow the rules, what does that say about the rules? This is why Hungary matters. It's not about Viktor Orban. It's not even really about Hungary. It's about whether there's an alternative model for how European countries can organize their economies in a multipolar world. Hungary is the laboratory, and the experiment is live. So where do you stand? Are you team values, believing that Europe should stick to its principles even if it costs prosperity? Or are you team pragmatism, believing that in a cold, competitive world, the only thing that matters is keeping your factories running and your people employed? There's no right answer. But there is a choice. And that choice will define Europe's future. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.